I'm Max Hanlon. I'm a theologian who loves art.
I'm Tessa Davidson. I'm an artist who loves theology.
And this is Our First Word.
Theology of Beauty.
Okay, so I have a question today, Tessa.
All right.
I love this painting by William Blake.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little watercolor called Elohim Creating Adam, and it's, I think, in the Tate Gallery, the original, and I would like to have it in my office where I could look at it, but the Tate Gallery is not interested in selling it to me at a price that I can afford. So I went on the internet and I bought a copy of this painting, and put it on my wall. I also love this piece by, I never know how to say his name right. Is it William Adolphe Bouguereau or Bouguereau? Bouguereau. Yeah, it's very nice.
But you can't see it.
Like yeah, you can't see it on the podcast. Tessa always kind of does a little shoulder wobble when she says his French name. Anyway, I love his piece called The Difficult Lesson, and I wanted it for my house. But again, they would not sell it to me at a price that I could afford. And I ordered a print of it. And I remember asking you about it. And you said, your face said one thing and then your word said something else. Your word said, well, yeah, I mean, he's a master. If you have a print, that's a good person to get one of. And you gave good advice about this sort of print looks better than this kind and so forth and so on. If you want just a poster
I don't remember
this
conversation, but.
Well, I try to remember everything.
Okay.
People. I'm a listener. That's
Yeah.
what people know me as. No. So, but what your face said was, why are you buying a print?
I did not say that with my face.
Oh, you
I
did.
buy prints
You did.
myself.
Yeah. But part of you in your heart of hearts was like, original artwork is really the thing to have. And when I went to Florence the first time, we were walking around, and outside in one of the plaza squares there is a statue of the David. And it is, to my eye, I mean, I'm not clever enough or skilled enough to discern differences. It looks just like the one that's inside the academy.
Nope. Shutting it down. No, it doesn't.
So I looked at it and I thought, whoa, but I wasn't I didn't want to go over and look at it. Like, I wouldn't go over and look at it close because I was like, I didn't come here to see some reproduction of the David. I came to see the David.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to say. Let's imagine that the one outside was like Star Trek did a replicator and it just was, I mean, exactly to the molecular level, exactly the same, but it was a copy.
It was a copy, and that's where the original was placed. So
Right.
I see the value of having it there.
So my question is, does beauty necessitate originality? Or maybe a better way to say it is, what's the role of originality in beauty? And I'm thinking both in terms of like the production of art and things, but also like, I remember reading a story once about an English professor, and it was a Shakespeare scholar, and someone said to him, if you had a one wish, a genie, what would you wish for? And he said, I would wish to read Romeo and Juliet again for the first time.
Oh, wow.
Which I thought, that's pretty cool, but also I bet his family would have rather had something else. But what is that? He wants to go back and read it the first time, something about this, the original experience of it.
Right, yeah.
Or when I went to Marquette University one time to visit, I was very interested to go up in the library because, do you know what they have at Marquette? All of the original, like, handwritten and notes and the original manuscripts of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings.
Really?
It's a bizarre place for him to be,
Wow.
but they're at Marquette University in the library up on like the second or third floor. Somebody who worked there back in the 60s recognized, or maybe the 50s even, recognized, they were like, these are really special and they're going to be special. So they contacted Professor Tolkien and they bought them real cheap. And now that's where they're like, all the originals are there. It's very cool. But I read those books a bunch of times, and what is originality? What's the role of this?
And you're right to point out how culturally we recognize that the original as being more valuable. Right now, thousands and thousands of people are pushing their way into these museums so that they can see original pieces and they can stand in front of them. And we recognize the market value of originals versus prints. We think about, would I rather be with my friend in person, or would I just rather communicate or just look at a picture of them? There's something about those face-to-face experiences and encounters that can't necessarily be replicated. And so I think we could just look out culturally and say, all right, we place a value on originality and about the real thing. And so what is it about that phenomenon that makes that more valuable?
Yeah.
And so that's the question that's being raised.
That's and there's a sense in which, right, you're an artist. So just talk about, I want to get philosophical about this. I want to get to the role of originality. I'm interested if beauty is a name for God and originality is an aspect of beauty. What does this tell us about God? I want to get to that. But I want to start on the ground and then kind of build up to there. So you're an artist. You paint original pieces.
Yeah.
How do you decide whether to sell prints or make prints? Is there any hesitation? Tell me what you think about that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of just different ideas when it comes to making prints of your work. Personally, I've not really done a lot of that myself, making a lot of prints of my work.
How come?
Well, I just have not, I'm not a commercial artist. I just haven't really, really opened myself up to that. And some artists have a very disdain for creating something and then having cheap reproductions just distributed. There's something that lessens how their work is then perceived. And so, for me, if I like to make large works, then a lot of the scale is built into the experience of the work. And so when you have reproductions, that strips away the scale of something.
If it's a smaller one.
Right, yeah. So that's affecting the aesthetic experience. Also, I work with traditional media. I'm not a digital artist. And so, having the painterly qualities and being able to have the presence of those materials, that's important to me. And so all of these are different aspects of the quality of my work and what I value in my work. And so those things cannot be appreciated in prints and sometimes in a digital format. There are other people that make work that actually their work can translate better into prints. So for example, the watercolor media actually translates better into prints than sometimes, an impasto kind of oil painting. And so you have, as an artist, you have to be sensitive to what's being lost when you are making prints, not just for having it disseminated many times, but also thinking about the quality of the experience itself.
And it seems like some artists choose materials and mediums precisely because they are difficult. I'm thinking Fujimura, the stuff that he does that's got gold and all these really expensive mediums that he works in. You can look at I look at his artwork on computer screens to be what's going on with this and try to understand it. But I really want to see it in person because I bet the experience is different because looking at these materials is different than looking at a photograph of these materials. But there's a different question here, right? There we're not talking about originality versus reproduction. We're talking about one thing versus something that's pretty close to it or kind of like it. I'm interested in actual reproduction that trained people can't tell the difference. We know that there are fakes of paintings, right?
Right.
And some people even speculate that sometimes in the museum, what's on display is not the original. The original's kept somewhere else and they put a fake out. Right?
That's, yes, the case. I won't get into it, but yes, that is often the case.
And so we think, well, if we can't tell the difference, does it matter? Is there a difference? What do you think?
Well, I think there is part of it that is authentic as far as the design, the composition. When I'm in my classroom and I'm talking about these different paintings, yes, I'm not talking about the actual thing because we're not standing in front of it in a museum, but I am talking about the composition, the colors, the arrangement. I am able to have a meaningful conversation around it, even with a reproduction. So I wouldn't just discard that experience. But when it comes to our assertion as human beings as being present in the world and that we're physical and we're here at a time and place, like that's where I think the original does matter, because it's an assertion of the fact that this happened. And and it happened at a certain time and place, and it was made. And so I'm not ready to discard the importance of the original, because I think that's fundamental to our records as human beings.
So that's interesting. I hear you talking about it's not just the phenomenon of like originality as a concept, but rather the original is tied to a concrete reality, a time, a place, a particular shade of green that he had to get that paint from this apothecary, blah, 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 right on down.
And it puts us in touch with that. You know, when I'm standing in front of a painting that was made 500 years ago and I'm seeing it face to face, or I'm looking at a Van Gogh painting, it then brings me in a contact, even though the artist is dead, there's something about that encounter and that experience that I'm looking at what he put his hand on. You know, and so we're almost like dialoguing with these people in the past. And I think that's important.
Augustine has a story in City of God. He's talking about bodies and souls. And Rome had just been sacked, and all these people had died, and there had been, of course, horrible assaults on people. So Christians there were writing him and saying, my father was killed, and his body was hacked up and thrown in the river. Can he still be resurrected? Or do I have an obligation to go find my father's body and bury it, give it Christian burial and such? And Augustine, that's the context he's writing. It's a fascinating question, how should we about bodies and such. But he uses an illustration, and he says something like, we naturally want to honor the bodies of the dead because they were the bodies of those people. And he says, just as if you have a ring that is not of particular value, but your father wore it every day of his life, you value the ring highly because of his wearing it, not because of the metal it's made of or something.
Right.
Or think about, like, I think there's an episode of The West Wing where there's a painting that's hanging in the White House, and the like art curator, whoever for the White House, which would be a pretty cool job, by the way, tells the artist, she finds it, and oh, this belonged to my late husband. I forget the story.
Yeah.
Anyway, he says, we can give it back to you. Or we can leave it hanging here, and the longer it hangs in the White House, the more value it will accumulate because of where it hangs, right? If a painting's been in the Louvre or whatever, the value goes up because of its association. So again, I'm thinking about association with place, with history, with a moment. That seems like part of what we mean by originality.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it also seems like originality is it's not only that, oh, it happened at that time in that place, because that's actually true of like everything. It's true of the copy too. This is a copy that was made at a time and a place by somebody.
Yeah.
But originality is like, no, there's something new here. Before this, before the, what's it called? The Vitruvian Man? Da Vinci's piece, right? Before he drew that, no one had ever drawn that. Right. No one had ever seen that. No one had ever thought that. He brought it from not existing into existing. And I mean, of course, he'd seen human beings. He'd seen the proportions were all there. We're always sub-creating. We talked about that.
Yeah,
in
and
episode.
even Leonardo is called the Vitruvian Man because he's borrowing it from this architect Vitruvius, who outlines this idea of the human body fitting within the circle and the square. And
right.
So he's working that out.
So we're always cobbling together, like all of our creative work is a sort of bricolage, putting pieces together and things. And yet, that did not exist before he made it.
Right.
When we say originality, I think that's the thing we're normally pointing to. This startling inbreaking of a new thing into the world.
It is the first. Yeah.
The first.
And even with like additions and printmaking, the first within an edition is the most valued. And so you're right as far as thinking about that inbreaking and that initial image put out in the world.
So there's a famous essay, 20th century essay, that talks about the danger of the mechanical reproduction of art. Seems like if you're, let's just use money as an indication of our value on things, an axiological tool or whatever. Somebody takes a screenshot on their computer and then pushes print on their color printer of a Michelangelo piece. They could sell that to me, and I would pay very little money for it. If we had a high quality, high resolution, it looked more like it, I'd pay more.
Right.
But there's also this phenomenon where there are hand-produced copies of masterworks.
Yeah.
There are famous artists today, their job, they're commercial, they just work and they repaint Starry Night or whatever. And those pieces that are made by hand are more valuable than the machine-made ones. Mm-hmm. Just the same way that like a Rolls-Royce is more valuable than a Lexus, but the money is mostly in the fact that everything on a Rolls-Royce is done by hand. That seems to be a piece of this too. Like a copy done by hand feels original to us in a way that a copy done by a machine doesn't. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that is?
I think because we value, maybe it has its roots in the incarnation and the fact that we are, when God became flesh and he dignifies the physical, and when God breathes into the dust and we are physical as well as spirit, there's something about the physical realm and the human touch and the personal way in which we approach these projects that is so valuable that can't be reproduced by mechanisms and machines. There's
like
something
the
about
time, maybe.
Yeah, like and God
right?
taking the dust and sculpting it with his hands and that touch there. I don't know. I think some of that might trace back to just who we are as human beings.
But it also, that seems right to me, but it also seems weird that we don't make much of anything without using machines, right?
Sure.
Your paintbrush is a simple
that's all
machine.
Technology. Yeah.
Right? We don't think that a sculptor working with clay, making it with his hands, he's doing real art, but a guy using a chisel on a piece of marble, well, look, it's the chisel doing all the work. Like, we don't feel that. But if we program an AI to make a piece of art, then we go, nah, that's not it. There's too much distance.
Yeah, there's something about that human interaction. I think that's important and that's significant.
It reminds me of like when you think about sports. I don't run or swim. I've never liked that kind of stuff. But those seem like the purest sports to me. Like a foot race seems like the purest sport. Whereas, like, I do like to play racket sports, tennis and racquetball and pickleball and such. But one of the things that I notice is if you're playing tennis with an old wooden racket and somebody else is playing with, a high-quality new racket with the best technology, it's a tremendous advantage.
Yeah.
And this strikes me as like, okay, something in the nature of sport is being lost here because it's the machines playing against each other, the machine of the wooden racket versus the, high quality, I guess fiberglass, where do they make them out of now?
Yeah.
Racket. It's like, we're distancing ourselves from human excellence.
That's so interesting because that connects with how, like, why the Greeks went into the Olympics and would perform in the nude.
Yeah.
Strip away all of those extra, advantages and things and just human bodies, what human bodies can do against human bodies.
Right. And artistry seems like that to me too, that the more dependent you are on a machine and the more complex the machine is, the more things the machine can do. Like your paintbrush is a machine, but it's a pretty simple machine. But there's also no doubt that you as an artist in the 21st century, with the paints that you have access to and the brush materials that you have access to and the light that you have access to and the kind of canvas, like all this stuff, you have advantages over the great artists of the past. That's why you're so much better than Michelangelo, right?
Stop.
No, I'm playing.
Stop. I definitely have better access to materials, but yeah, he could paint circles around.
Right. But think what he could do today.
I know it. That's when students complain about their materials, I'm like, you realize that any like artists of the past, like they're working with Crayola versus what you've got. So
yeah, but we don't disdain, like we don't look down on lots of art that involves machines, but there is some critical mass at which the machine is doing more of the work than we feel like than the human. Like for example, think about if running a race barefoot is the classic, this is pure sport. And playing tennis, it's sport, but the racket's doing some of the work. Now think about like a NASCAR driver. Well, I mean, there's still, the human driver plays a massive role in this, but the car is doing most of the work, or horse racing, or, whatever thing you want to think about. It seems like there's a analogy to art in which a digital artist is not doing the same sort of thing. It feels less real or original to us than an artist working with tactile mediums. But an artist and a digital artist working with their pen on, their electronic pen on a iPad or whatever, still seems to be doing more like something closer to real art than someone programming an AI to paint pictures.
Yeah, definitely things have changed and the media has changed. And so I think the creativity element, you're being creative, but with a different media, and you're moving things around in a different way. So I don't know. I guess I want to be cautious there with how I talk about comparing one media with another media, because I still see that as creative work. You're just using a whole different set of tools.
And that's to me is part of the point.
Yeah.
In this conversation is, while there's something very right about saying, if you can mass produce the David in a factory, what you're producing is tacky and kitschy and not good, even if it's, identical to Michelangelo's. But on the other hand, it seems wrong to me. Like I want to push back on what I think of as kind of just a snobbery that acts like programming an AI isn't creative work or isn't a sort of artistry. But at the same time, it ain't the same thing
it's
as
something different.
As working
it's
with
like
paint.
Comparing apples and oranges.
And so both things can be things of beauty, but the human role in this and the bringing into existence that which wasn't there before, or the arranging of things in a new way, whether what you're arranging is ones and zeros in a binary code, or words from a language into a poem, or, there's that great line from that movie A Star is Born that I'm a huge fan of. There are only 12 notes between any octave, and then the octave repeats. All any artist can offer this world is how they see those 12 notes. That's it. And then the guy says, he loved how you saw him. So we're always just arranging,
right,
but we're arranging in new ways. That's this creative piece. And the newness, the originality, to me, is part of what makes beautiful things beauty is the newness of them. Standing in a long tradition, right? It's the same 12 notes, but something new happens. And so I want to go back a little bit to think theologically about this. Like, is there originality in God? Is God who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, who was and is to come, the Alpha and the Omega? Like, is he done? Has he sort of always already done everything he's going to do? So originality is not a proper description of God. It seems to me that our insight about beauty tells us something true about God, and that is there is a liveliness, there is a newness, an ever freshness to God. And it makes me wonder about things like we need a Trinitarian vision of God in order to have the motion that's requisite for love and that's also requisite for originality. To be always doing something new and yet operating within the same way. God is always being God. The Father is always loving the Son with the love which is the Spirit, but it never gets old. And this is something when we think about, like you heard Christians say this, we think about going to heaven and they're like, won't it get boring? Like we're just going to look at God all day, or we're just going to...
What a lack of imagination.
Yeah, and part of it's because they have no imagination. Part of it's because they imagine it's the same thing.
They forget his mercies are new every morning.
Yeah, right. Every morning it's new. And so there's this wonderful energy and life within God to say, this is one of my favorite lines in all of Scripture. Behold, I am making all things new. Originality is what God is all about, right? He looks out and there was darkness over the surface of the deep, and God says, I'm going to do a new thing. Let there be light. And there never had been light before. And, he says, I'm going to do this new thing and that new thing. And so this newness is not merely something that we see God doing in Christ, though that was a new thing. He did new things with Israel. He did new things with the prophets, new things in Christ, new things with the Spirit, new things in the church, new things like every day. Every day he's making all things new. And this is not merely something that God does, like an external act. It is also who God is in himself. He is always new himself. God who is eternal is also always eternally becoming what God is. There's a futurity to God in this way. There's a theologian, Robert Jensen, who talks about this in ways that I find really exciting. And he says this is the work of the Spirit. The Spirit is this futurity, this pulling of God's self from eternity to eternity, right, through eternity. And that theological vision that's abstract and hard to contemplate, to me also like fills us with wonder. And I like the way that we can think about just the intuition that an original piece is worth more than a copy. And we build up from that to think about how do we make art? How do we appreciate art? How do we display art? How do we think about beauties like the sunrise, that are new, but the same thing every day and such? To say, well, what does this tell us about God? And we end up just gesturing toward these mysteries we can't get. But it does feel important to say God is that which can never be made new by anyone but God, but he is new and he is always making new. And so then if that's what God is like, then that points to us and says, look, like being creative, striving for originality, not just copying, whether we're talking about like personal fashion, or conversations, people who just want to say the same thing that everyone's always saying, they've got their script, or making art, or like growing as a person. This newness, originality, is part of the ethic and the aesthetic that God gives to us out of who God is in himself. And so to see this power of originality in art and to know, I want to see the real David, not just the replica that's outside. I want to see the original, is a way of saying, I'm always looking for the source. I'm looking for that which is the new. And then I'm looking for how can I participate in making that newness come. Now, we have this instinct that originality is better than reproduction. And we also have this kind of like, I think, knowledge that machines don't always ruin art.
Right.
But there is something lost. Like, what's the danger in mechanical reproduction? Whether we're talking about machines just reproducing things, or we're talking about AI, or what's the danger that you see there?
Well, I think when we live in a world of machines and all that we encounter are things produced by machines, it does affect the way we think and the way we see the world and the way we see people. I'm reminded of Charlie Chaplin's the modern age. And when you think about him like working in this assembly line, and then he gets pulled into the machine, and then when he comes back out of the machine, then he looks at other humans and he tries to, treat them like machines. And so I think it is affecting beauty, living in this age where we are turning everything into tools and things that can be reproduced and what they're used for. And this is the danger that I'm seeing with how people are even looking at art and aesthetics. They're thinking about, they've lost touch with the original. When I ask a whole class of students, okay, and I have like the Mona Lisa up, and I'm like, who's seen this before? And everybody raises their hand. And I'm like, well, who's actually seen it? And then all the hands go down. What I'm noticing is that pretty much nearly 99% of our encounters with artwork or with masterworks, it's mostly all just through this mechanized, reproductive way, or reproduced way. And so there's something lost about having those encounters with that time and place in history, and with taking pilgrimages out to go and see the original thing. But I think this is why people travel across the world, to go and see and to stand in those places. But there is something lost in our age where we have just stripped everything down to, these mass-produced products, and it's affected the way we see each other. And so we have shorter attention spans. We don't stop and contemplate art. We don't stop and contemplate beauty. We look at, aesthetic works for just what they can do for us and how they can just decorate our walls and just, I don't know, we lose touch with something when we just strip away that originality. And
and it seems to me one of the things we lose is the human.
Yeah.
Right. One of the things we like about art is that we like about natural beauty is, oh, wow. And Christians say God made that, right? Or the world made that or whatever. One of the things we lose with human creativity when we begin to mass produce it is we lose the human. We lose the sort of, one person made this thing. But now all the versions of what we encounter are made by machines, and the machine, like a press, for example, or a mold, it makes the exact same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And that's what it's for. Yeah. And so there's no growth. It's dead. It's not, there's no life to it. And this is why if you make too many copies of anything, it loses value. Right? Even like, think about like gold is valuable in part because it's rare.
Yeah. And
we find a bunch of it, the value goes down.
Yeah.
So then you might point and say like, well, what about AI? It's precisely the promise of AI is it seems like it's alive. It seems to have an intelligence. It doesn't make the same thing every time. It makes new things over and over again. And that's true, but it replaces the human. Yeah. And so it's an admirable machine or an interesting machine, but we're losing touch with intentionality. There's almost it's still that first impulse of programming it, and then it takes on a life of its own, but it's not a human life, whatever we think about them. And so I think one of the things that we lose in mechanical reproduction is art, at least, is meant to connect us to human beings, either the human experience, like when looking at a painting, you're seeing something through the artist's eyes. There's an empathy and a connection there, or a training us to see things. You know, like I want to see all the pieces that like William Blake, who I loved his poetry first. Then I wanted to see all his artwork to see how did he see things, not just how did he say things. And so if my only experience of art is mediated through stacks and stacks and stacks of an AI generated process, the human gets lost in there.
Yeah, and creativity is affected. You know, all these talks of AI, I often hear people being positive, like, oh, it's going to be helpful for creativity. But when you look at our scores of how creative we are over decades, we are just taking a nosedive. And the question is how is technology affecting our creativity? Is it helping us? And again, through thousands of studies, it's like, no, we are like draining away our ability to think new. Instead, technology just gets us on these bandwagons of trends. And so when we look at AI, you're just going to get a lot of the same. And so when artists use this as crutches and they just become trained to go there first instead of the ability to generate on their own, that's going to then reshape our, the way we express what it means to be human. And I think just there's not enough people kind of raising up these points on the front end. We just kind of take in this technology and we're not aware of how it is affecting us. This is where like Andy Warhol was very prophetic because he was living in the 60s and recognizing this time of the machine and mass production. And he said, it's turning us all into machines. And basically he became this mimic where he said, you know what, I'm going to put out exactly what the inputs are, what I'm receiving. And at one point he's like, yeah, I want to be a machine. I don't even want to touch my work. And he just was able to point to the fact that when you put humans in this machine, what happens to them? And you see this dehumanizing of people like Marilyn Monroe. And you just see how that affects the human being when lost in this world mediated by reproduced images.
Mm-hmm. Marx is making the same point about the alienation of the laborer from the labor. And it's relevant whenever he's talking about that. He's generally talking about manufacturing work. So we're not talking about painting as much. We're talking about like making a chair and then later on making a car, right? But there was creativity and artistry and skill in doing that. But we don't want to just be, I think, like a kind of Luddite approach that says, oh, if we're losing this, let's make sure that all chairs are always only handmade
Right.
and I only have access to what's around me. And, I'm actually just a impoverished person living in Arkansas. I guess I can never look at beautiful art because can't travel to the Louvre, and that's where, these paintings are. So there's an overreaction that I think is possible we want to guard against, but that doesn't negate the very real dangers that have to be named as well.